Nature Extended. Chapter 4, Cranking Up Conformism. Gobekli Tepe. Gobekli Tepe.
Gobekli Tepe.
Gobekli Tepe. Gobekli Tepe. Gobekli Tepe is a series of Stonehenge-like clusters of T-shaped monoliths, each one hoisted upright like a headless giant, situated in southeastern Anatolia, Turkey. Bavaria Stonehenge was built around 2000 to 3000 BCE. These stones were quarried much earlier, some 12,000 years ago. The sheer effort of human labor involved is mind-boggling. Nobody knows how it was done without bulldozers. Bulldozers, winches, cranes, or even steel hand tools, and nobody knows why. What inspired ancient foragers to push their Stone Age technology to the very limits, cutting 20-ton stones out of the hillside and carving beautiful images onto them. Onto them. When I first arrived at Gobekli Tepe, I found the monuments partially excavated on the crest of a hill, overlooking a parched and flat landscape, except at the horizon where the hills rose majestically through the haze. I tried to imagine how they would have looked 12,000 years previously. I could picture fields of white wheat as far as the eye could see, trees with bountiful nuts and berries for the taking, and herds of white gazelle. Wild gazelle. Right now, however, I was surrounded by scientists in broad-brimmed hats and headscarves, milling around or peering down into excavations. Some were taking photos, others remonstrating loudly with each other about some point of scholarly disagreement, and still others clustering into small groups around one of the archaeologists working at the site, giving impromptu lectures. I wandered through the crowd, listening in on the conversations. One of the archaeologists had picked up a piece of rock about the size of a cigar and was telling a small knot of eager listeners that it was a PPMB, pre-pottery Neolithic B, never formed blade. Never formed blade. Indicating that it was shaped roughly like a boat and had been made during the phase of the Neolithic, before pottery had been invented. Priceless objects like these were scattered all around our feet amid the rubble. I moved on, passing two prominent archaeologists who were arguing about whether the stele resembled the totem.
Stele.
Steely.
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 Whether the Steely resembled the totem poles of the Pacific Northwest. And then I caught sight of Klaus Schmidt.
Klaus Schmidt.
Klaus Schmidt, leader of the excavations, wearing a flat cap and a light cotton scarf that flapped around him in the breeze. He was surrounded by a throng of eager listeners. I went to join them. Schmidt was pointing to one of the great T-shaped monoliths. We were surrounded by similar monuments, each formed roughly like a giant person, with arms bent at the elbows carved into its sides. Schmidt was drawing people's attention to the part of the stele where its genitals would have been, were it not for the fact that a belt-like object had been carved into it. Although we cannot see a penis in the nails, we can infer from the belt a masculine bodily adornment that the figure was male. As I drew closer, I could see that the monument was densely decorated with relics of foxes, bulls, vultures, spiders, and seemingly countless other species of fauna known to have roamed, wriggled, and flapped around the late Pleistocene.
Pleistocene or early Holocene landscape.
Pleistocene or early Holocene landscape. Pleistocene. Holocene. Around the late Pleistocene or early Holocene landscape. Equally striking, however, was the images not inscribed on the stones. Although these complex foraging peoples were just beginning to cultivate crops, there were no plants depicted at Gobekli Tepe, and with the exception of one carving of a headless skeleton and the eerie anthropomorphism of each monolith when taken as a whole, human figures were few and far between. These master carvers were very interested in animals. Despite controversy about Götebli's significance, a consensus was emerging among archaeologists that this was a hugely significant ritual center. However, why the ancient peoples needed it and what it meant remained a mystery. I was there as part of a diverse team of scientists who had been asked to help solve it. My best guess went to the very heart of the ritual mindset, a force in human affairs that can seem as vast, archaic, and submerged as the stones at Gobekli Tepe themselves. So let's dig. The archaeology at Gobekli. The archaeologists at Gobekli Tepe represent the earliest stirring of a revolution in the scale of human societies around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. Back then, there were only about 5 million human beings on the entire planet, a fraction of the number of people living in many large cities today. Not only was the total population of humanity tiny compared with the billions now spread across the earth, but the groups our ancestors belonged to were minuscule.
Minuscule portion.
Minuscule compared with modern states. Until around 12,000 years ago, all humans lived by foraging for wild foods, by gathering edible plants, fruits, nuts, and seeds, and scavenging or hunting wild animals. This meant being on the move, forever shifting camp in search of fresh resources. In many environments, this mood of subsistence probably sustained bands of hunter-gatherers numbering a few dozen individuals at most. Unlike many other primates that forage in small groups, human bands of hunter-gatherers often interacted cooperatively with others, exchanging goods and perhaps joined forces in particular forms of hunting or to drive away unwanted interlopers.
Interloper.
Unwanted interlopers. One theory that these forms of cooperation will have been most prevalent among non-members of similar cultural groups. Speaking mutual. Speaking mutually intelligible languages. But another theory is that no clear ethnic or linguistic boundaries were present among hunter-gatherer bands. Of course, both theories could be correct. We should be wary of assuming one-size-fits-all view of their cultural traditions and intergroup relations. Nevertheless, we can be confident that people living in those ancient societies will have had a much more parochial view of humanity than most of us live in today. For ancient hunter-gatherers, the most relevant community in day-to-day life would typically have had just a few dozen members. And even the larger network of people you may have encountered over the course of a lifetime would have consisted almost entirely of people you ran into repeatedly, allowing you to put a name to a face or to know who was related to whom. At some locations, however, communities would experience a periodic influx of visitors, perhaps many hundreds of them, during key moments of the ritual cycle. One of those places was Göbekli Tepe. The population at the population at Göbekli probably swelled, especially when food was plentiful. It has been suggested that during the late summer and autumn, when herds of gazelles passed through the region, otherwise extinct bands may have descended on this sacred site as an annual tradition, perhaps hunting cooperatively, and sharing the bounty in communal feasting events. It seems plausible that the ancient hunter-gatherers of Western Asia were bound together into small groups, united through ties of kinship and marriage and the sacred rituals of countless local traditions. Göbekli provides a window into the flowering of this culturally rich civilization and its imagery. But then, around 10,000 years ago, people stopped making the great monoliths at Göbekli and the site was abandoned The farming communities that eventually spread across the lands once occupied by the creators of Göbekli monoliths were now celebrating their newfound mastery of the natural world. They did so in an explosion of new arts and technologies, from decorative pottery to two-story houses. Gone were the huge occasional feasts that brought together disparate brought together disparate cultural groups. Instead, we find signs of a more homogenized regional culture, increasingly elaborate but lacking the reverence for nature that apparently preoccupied the hunter-gatherers at Göbekli. Eventually, everyone forgot about the monuments they had so painstakingly erected, and all that remained was a sun-baked hillside in which the buried stones remained undisturbed for millennia, as if in unmarked tombs. This chapter is about the ways in which new kinds of rituals first emerged to support cooperation in large cultural groups, and how this gave rise to increasingly complex societies like the ones that gradually emerged after the abandonment of Göbekli Tepe. Rises in population size correlate closely with what social scientists call social complexity. As settlements grow larger and denser, they need to develop increasingly sophisticated ways of managing resources, such as land to build on or farm or communal access to the water supply. Being packed into larger, more densely populated settlements requires new ways of resolving disputes, defending against external enemy, coordinating the construction of public works, and so on. The institutions that evolve to manage such problems tend to become more elaborate over time, a process that leads to more specialized roles, more widely standardized rules and norms, and eventually more centralized and hierarchical and hierarchical systems of governance. All these innovations are aspects of increasing social complexity. The first step in the evolution of such complexity was the creation of larger social groups, which were organized around increasingly long-term collective planning and cooperation, and we can trace the beginning of these processes to the period following the abandonment of Göbekli Tepe. Around 10 millennia ago, the world's first farming techniques were spreading, starting in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, and then independently emerging in regions like China and South America. Eventually, agriculture will be invented in at least 11 locations around the world at different points in time. These developments seem to have been accompanied by fundamental transition in people's ritual lives. As groups settled and became increasingly dependent on farming, rituals became more frequent and changed form. These in turn helped cultural groups to grow and spread. This process was rooted in the conformism bias that I described in Chapter 1. Recall that the human tendency to overestimate, overimitate, To over-imitate is often motivated by the ritual stance, our tendency to copy the behaviors of others, even when they are assumed to lack the not knowable instrumental rationale.
Rationale.
Rationale. Rationale.
Rationale.
Rationale. Rationale.
Rationale.
Rationale. Instrumental rationale. In this chapter, we will see how that urge to conform was harnessed and extended during the transition to agriculture to build much larger scale communities, such that the approach to ritual we have inherited today differs strikingly from that of our Paleolithic forebears. But this is not an easy process to unravel. Understanding how ritual life was changing in the societies where crops were first cultivated and wild animals gradually domesticated presents many challenges. It requires us to look beyond the tantalizing patchy evidence from archaeology, drawing also on what we can see in the diversity of human cultures today, and taking into account what psychologists can tell us about the way humans think and behave in response to well-known environmental cues. This is a detective story in which we must bring together all our sleuthing skills. We must consider not only the evidence to be gleaned from the crime scene itself, but also our knowledge of analogous cases, probable causes, and natural biases that shape human behavior.